This is Right to Life Radio with John Girardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, a production of Right to Life of Central California. And now, here's your host, John Girardi.
Good morning, Fresno. A miserable Lent to all of you. Right to Life Radio here with John Girardi here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400, or streaming to you live via Right to Life of Central California's Facebook channel, www.facebook.com/Right to Life CA, if you want to watch this show right there on Facebook Live. We have started our 40 Days for Life campaign here in the city of Fresno. We are out there at Planned Parenthood. We have rented the building right next door to Planned Parenthood.
Woot woot.
So if you want to come out and pray in front of Planned Parenthood, if you want to support what we're doing at Right to Life of Central California, please give us a call on a weekday, 229-2229, to sign up for a time. Hey, if you're out here listening and you say, boy, I'd like to be involved with pro-life stuff, but I'm not sure what to do, come out to 40 Days for Life. You stand on the sidewalk, you hold a sign, you pray. Just sign up for 1 hour a week. Say, okay, I got a lunch break I could take on Thursdays, so maybe every Thursday from 12 to 1, I'll sign up to go, or every Friday from 2 to 3 during 40 Days for Life, I'll sign up to go. This is a wonderful way for all of you to be involved and to help spread a culture of life. So, again, 559-229-2229. Call us at Right to Life of Central California if you want to sign up, or get in touch with us at info@rtlcc.org, or you can email our 40 Days for Life director, Tanya, TANIA, at rtlcc.org. Okay. So with that said, let's head into the pro-life news. Let me imitate Rush Limbaugh here.
Wow.
I'm holding.
That is a hurricane of paper.
There you go. I'm holding in my not nicotine-stained fingers.
Hey, do you mind if I introduce myself too?
Oh, yeah. Hey, by the way, Jonathan Keller here.
Yep.
Your erstwhile co-host, Jonathan Keller from California Family Council.
Because I am sometimes erst while I have to be here.
Yes,
So
he is not erst today. He's just while. All right. I'm holding in my hands some information from our friends at the Capital Resource Institute.
Yes.
Karen England, their director, spoke last week in Fresno for the Fresno County and City Republican Women Federated Club. I happened to attend that to hear Karen. I may or may not, in my personal capacity, be a registered Republican. We'll just leave that up for all of you to decide. My mom is in the Republican Women Club, so she invited me to come. So I said, all right, I'll come. And Karen England, the head of Capital Resource Institute, has been doing a lot of work, as has Jonathan, following some of the really bad curriculum stuff that is happening in California public schools as it relates to sex ed. All right. Now, on this show, I want to talk about some of these things because a lot of them touch on the abortion issue, and I'm sure a lot of people who follow us have kids in public schools. And it would not be surprising if you did not know about all of these things, because at least in Fresno Unified and Clovis Unified, our school boards are about as useless as a bag of hair and have not alerted parents to the horrible things that the state legislature has been mandating for all of our public schools. So I want to alert all of you as to what is happening. Now, there are things that many social conservatives are upset about that relates to sexuality and transgenderism and things like that. I'm not going to delve into that. I'm mostly going to delve into the general principles of sex ed that are being implemented in California public schools and all the stuff that has to do with abortion and abortifacient contraception. Okay, so that's Right to Life Central California has a certain focus. We will restrict ourselves to that. Jonathan may, if he wants, make some editorial remarks on other aspects of this.
If you want more in-depth discussion of this topic, you can
check out California Family Council. Go to californiafamily.org, by the way, and you can read about it all you want. All right, so let's get into it. So California's public schools, the sex ed curriculum that they teach, it is governed by the California Healthy Youth Act. This was a law that was signed into law in 2015. Of course, in 2015, I didn't have a radio show, so I couldn't yell at all of you about how horrible it was back then. But, I have a radio show now.
You were also barely living in the state.
I was also not quite living in California yet. So, anyway. So, the California Healthy Youth Act, that sounds nice. Who's opposed to having youths who are healthy? What kind of monster would you have to be? The California Healthy Youth Act sort of provides the requirements for what the sex ed curricula in the public schools need to teach. So here are some of the things that must be taught in the sex ed curricula in public schools in California. Once you get into junior high and high school, here are the things that your kid needs to learn about. In addition to things about which I will make no editorial comment, like things about all different types of gender expression, gender identity, affirmatively recognizing all kinds of sexual orientations and same-sex relationships and transgenderism and fluid gender stuff, about which I will make no comment. They also, in this bill, require a certain kind of education as it relates to contraception and abortion. Specifically, students must be educated about all legally available forms of birth control, which includes abortion, which includes stuff like the IUD or long-term release contraceptives that are not actually contraceptive, but actually function as abortifacients. They alter the lining of a woman's uterus so that a new fetus cannot adhere to the uterine wall and allow the baby to be flushed out. So these are really kind of more abortion machines than they are contraceptive measures. So every student who is in the sex ed program, I believe from 7th grade on is when they start teaching about contraception and abortion and things like that.
Possibly earlier, but possibly earlier,
is being forced to learn this. Now, there are some right now in 2019. These curricula have now been drafted, approved, and are starting to be implemented in California public schools. There are some school districts that are not allowing kids to opt out of this. Okay? Now, we have not heard this in Clovis Unified and Fresno Unified. From what we've heard, kids are being allowed to opt out. But here are a couple of horrible things about it. In addition to, one, Fresno Unified is using as their vendor to teach this stuff Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood Marmonte.
No conflict of interest.
No conflict of interest there. It's not like Planned Parenthood is going to tell these teenagers about legalized abortion and then profit from them going to Planned Parenthood to get an abortion. Let's also note that... Jeez Louise, Jonathan.
I'm sorry.
What's going on here?
I may have to step out and grab a glass of water.
Okay. So beyond these problems of their teaching about abortion, you're having actual abortion providers come in to the schools to teach your kids about abortion and about contraception, to give your kids contraception. So, and let's understand this in the context of California's laws about reproductive health care, okay? If you're a minor in California, you need your parents' permission for pretty much any healthcare service you get, all right? Your school can't give your kid an aspirin without asking you, the parent, first. But there are a couple of cutouts in the law requiring that children get their parents' permission for any kind of medical service. If you're a minor in the military, you don't need your parents' permission for healthcare services. If you're a minor and you're married, you're a 17-year-old bride, you no longer need your parents' permission for healthcare services. You're an emancipated minor. The other cutout from the normal law saying that you need your parents' permission for healthcare services is in the area of reproductive health. So, Planned Parenthood's coming in to teach your kids about access to abortion. They will be teaching your kids that, hey, you can get an abortion and not tell your parents. And there are a number of school districts throughout the state who interpret the law that they, on school time, can take your kid to an abortion facility to have a surgical abortion on school time with the kid listed as present, with the school district getting the money for that kid being present. Meanwhile, they're taking your kid to an abortion clinic to have an abortion that they are not telling you about. And the kid is able to keep this entirely confidential from you, his parent. You, his parent, who will have to deal financially, his or her parent, I should say, will have to deal with the emotional, psychological fallout of this decision. You will have to be there to pick up the pieces, but you will have no say in the actual choice about whether that kid goes to have an abortion or if that kid is getting an IUD. You know what kinds of bad health side effects there are for getting an IUD? I mean, they have these ads for them on TV. It's horrific, the kinds of things that can happen. I mean, you're sticking a piece of copper into your body. Like, there's so many bad outcomes. This is why children, generally speaking, aren't allowed to consent for healthcare procedures, because kids are not always great at weighing the pros and cons, weighing the benefits or non-benefits of a given medical procedure in the same way that a parent is. A parent might not want their kid to be on an IUD. They might want them to be on some other form of birth control, but maybe they don't want them to be on an IUD. Maybe they don't want them to be doing this. Maybe they don't want them to be doing that. Maybe a kid is afraid of what his parents will say if the parents find out that she's pregnant, but actually the parent would love the kid and help the kid. This is such an intrusion by the state into the private lives of children in a way that is so detrimental to their health, so detrimental to their well-being, and this is in the public schools. The default is that your kid is opted into this. So if you're not trying to opt your kid out of what's happening in the public schools in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and don't give me this BS that you're afraid he'll be teased. Protect your stinking kids.
Amen.
I'm yelling at you.
Yep.
But I love you. I'm not judging you. But I'm just letting you know there are horrible things happening in the public schools, and you need to take steps to protect your kids. We're going to keep talking about this after the break. More of the bad stuff that's happening in the sex ed laws in California. You're listening to Right to Life Radio here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. We've been talking about the California Healthy Youth Act, so-called, and the sex ed curricula that it requires in the public schools throughout California. In addition to requiring stuff about which I won't comment too much about, providing really graphic depictions of sex in its books and curricula that it's showing to kids, and some pretty crazy sex stuff, educating kids about things like earmuffs on your kids if you've got them. So we'll come back with kid-appropriate stuff in about 15 seconds from now. There you go, earmuffs on the kids. Telling your kids about things like anal intercourse, dental dams, all kinds of really wonderful things that are really appropriate for a 7th grade classroom.
And John, I just have to point out on this. I think a lot of times when I talk to parents who are thinking about either putting their kids into public school or are not thinking about pulling their kids out yet, I do think that there is this kind of numbness that a lot of parents have thought, oh, yeah, I know.
They're super liberal. But
things are worse than when I was in school, but, what are you going to do? There's YouTube and there's, MTV and blah, blah,
Yeah.
No. This is a completely different level than anything that any American public school student has ever experienced.
This is, and people, I think, especially people in Clovis, not to get super local here, but people in Clovis think, oh, Clovis Unified, it's a conservative school district. I mean, my old teacher, Mr. So-and-so, he's still there, and he was a real Republican guy, and they don't have unions in Clovis Unified. Like, oh, it's a super conservative state. Now, this is not a Clovis Unified specific problem. This is not a Fresno Unified specific problem. This is every public school in the state of California. Okay, this is mandated. And if these school districts don't do it, the ACLU is going to start suing their rear ends.
Yep.
Okay? So this is happening in Clovis Unified. This is happening. Okay? And the permission slips that they're sending home with the kids saying, hey, we're going to have sex ed curriculum. We're going to teach them about abstinence and about other, options, blah, blah, blah. They're probably not getting into the full detail of what they're telling your kids about, including things like really deviant forms of sex that maybe you don't want your 7th grader knowing about, including their rights as it relates to abortion, including all they need to know about IUDs and all different kinds of contraception that aren't actually just contraceptive, that are actually also abortifacient. This is being taught to your kids in the public schools, okay? And I don't want to come off as like condemning everyone who makes the choice to have their kid attend a public school, okay? Like, I understand everyone's in a different place. Everyone has different priorities. Everyone has different financial situations. Everyone has different things that they can handle. I get it. Like, not every family can send their kid to San Joaquin Memorial. Not every family can homeschool their kids. Not every family can, there aren't a lot of options out there. But what I am saying is you need to be aware of this and really consider pulling your kids out of these sex ed curricula. Because again, let me sort of describe one of the things I've been learning more about, and we at Right to Life want to get more into, is different kinds of sex education programs. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of sex ed in this country. So the dominant strain of sexual education in this country for years has focused on this sort of normative less or non-normative or no directive form of sex education. What do I mean by that? Basically, because of the research of Alfred Kinsey, who was a researcher at the University of Indiana, who did lots of studies that were really scientifically questionable on human sexuality. And he was a very influential person in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and helped develop his science, so-called, helped develop a lot of these his quackery, really, helped develop a lot of the sex ed curricula that began to be federally funded in the 1960s. And his theory was basically everyone is sexual, like even babies are sexual, and that everyone should be allowed to have sex with anyone they want, anytime they want, as many people as they want, wherever they want. He absolutely rejected any sort of form of morality within sex. His thinking really influenced the sex ed curricula that were started in the 60s and have been largely dominant in American public schools ever since. So what I mean by normative less or no norms sex ed is basically what you see in these curricula are, they'll have a curriculum that's called, positive prevention plus. And people will hear that and they'll think, oh, so they're going to emphasize, waiting and abstinence. The way they frame it is basically some people choose to wait until they're married to have sex. But most people decide not to do that and choose to have sex beforehand. Some people have sex when they're teenagers. Some people have sex with men. Some people have sex with women. Some people do the sex like this. Some people do that. There is no normativity given here. There's no sense of right or wrong.
Nothing's wrong.
Nothing is right. Nothing is wrong. The only right or wrong in this is, are you wearing a condom, or is the male in the situation wearing a condom or some form of birth control or some form of disease prevention
and is there
device?
consent?
And is there consent? Those are the only two moral factors involved. Now, another strain of sexual education that came out of the welfare reform programs of the 1990s, the welfare reform that the Republican Congress in the mid-90s passed and eventually strong-armed Bill Clinton into signing into law, after Clinton vetoed it like 3 times and then subsequently took credit for it when it started being successful. Just a little political commentary thrown in there. Just a classic Clinton example, how he vetoed welfare reform like 3 times, finally was strong-armed into signing it because he knew he would lose the 96 election if he didn't, and then took credit for it afterwards. Bill Clinton signed the welfare reform law into law in the mid-90s, and one of the things that the people pushing for welfare reform saw was basically if you followed 3 steps, your odds of being poor descend into almost nothingness, which is don't have a kid until you're married, get a full-time job, and graduate high school. If you do those 3 things, your odds of being poor are essentially zilch. So sexual risk avoidance education became a separate stream of federal government funding for sex ed programs. And these programs emphasized waiting to have sex until you're married, chastity until marriage, and then fidelity during marriage. And they've been hit with these labels of abstinence only, and they're mocked in movies like Mean Girls and just don't do it. Just don't do it. When really these programs are much more holistic. They're looking at relationship outcomes. They're looking at actual hard social science demonstrating that kids who wait until they are married are happier and have better health outcomes.
On basically every metric.
Yes, and kids who go through SRA education do not have higher rates of teen pregnancy than kids who go through sexual risk reduction, which is the dominant stream of sex ed. We are interested in this from an abortion perspective because by encouraging teenage sex, which the CDC has labeled as a health risk factor along the lines of drug use and excessive consumption of alcohol and smoking and things like that, by putting forward teenage sex as one of many acceptable alternative choices for sexual behavior, you're creating the conditions where abortion is necessary. Where abortion seems necessary, I should say. Where abortion seems like the best option for a girl who's now pregnant and scared and doesn't know what to do. We're going to dig into these questions more after the break. You're listening to Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. John Girardi from Right to Life. Right to Life Radio, this is John Girardi, Simon and Garfunkel. I generally try to pick high energy songs for Right to Life Radio because sometimes when I pick sad, gloomy songs, it's a downer. But this is like one of my favorite songs ever. So I just thought I'd play that.
It's a good one.
Love Simon and Garfunkel. Love Simon and Garfunkel. My most New York trait that I have is Simon and Garfunkel. Anyway, Right to Life Radio with John Girardi. April is coming soon. I guess it's really just the first show of March, so maybe I should be. Well, I guess this is the second show. Whatever. I like the music I like.
No, it's still the first show.
Well, for Facebook Live.
I guess
anyway,
that's true.
Anyway,
that's true.
Okay, so we have been talking about the sex ed curriculum in California public schools. Understand that if your kids are in the public schools and have not opted out of sex ed, they are being taught about abortion. They are being taught about their ability to access abortion, to have an abortion without you knowing about it, to how to get access to, and the effects of things like intrauterine devices, which are not actually contraception, they are abortifacients, other forms of abortifacient contraception. This is required by the California Healthy Youth Act. It is required by state law. No, Clovis Unified is not exempt from this law. No, Fresno Unified is not exempt from this law. If your kid is in a public school in this state and is in a sex ed program, this is what they're learning about. Okay? So wake up and fight against this. All right. Now, I want to talk about some of the history of sex ed in the state of California. So, well, not in the state of California, more broadly nationally. Sex ed kind of sex in general became more of a public health issue early in the 20th century in what's called the Progressive Era. So the Progressive Era yielded a couple of constitutional amendments that were all kind of interconnected. You had the amendments to give women the right to vote. You had prohibition, outlawing the sale of alcohol. You had the amendment for direct election of United States senators by the people rather than by state representatives, which had been the practice before. And you had the institution of the income tax. These were all part of a certain progressive movement where women became very involved in politics and were fighting against certain really bad societal problems. Some of these problems included there was rampant alcoholism in the United States. Alcoholism was an enormous problem, especially in many cities, and men were to an enormous, there was just huge rates of alcoholism. And so much so that it was a public health problem. And so people presented the idea of prohibition to counter this. And people sometimes talk about prohibition like it was just this weird fringe Protestant thing. But understand it, pass a constitutional amendment. You got to get 2/3 of both the House and the Senate and 3/4 of all the state legislatures to sign off on it. So this was a broad public measure. In addition to alcoholism, sexual promiscuity by men chiefly was a huge problem in American society. So much so that rates of sexually transmitted diseases were, for that time, off the charts. And one of the things that particularly women who are promoting these movements, not only for temperance movements, but also for sexual fidelity. They were talking about the unintentional victims of sexual promiscuity by men, chiefly the children to whom they were passing on sexually transmitted diseases, their wives to whom they were transmitting these diseases. There were huge numbers of prostitution in cities like Chicago. There were tons and tons of prostitutes, like all over the place. It was a huge public health problem.
And John, I think this is something that's hard for us to understand today. We really, in a lot of ways, do not have any public health crisis today that is comparable to what we saw in the late 1800s, early 1900s,
right?
At least visibly.
Yeah. Well, you certainly didn't have the methods of dealing with it or controlling it like we do now. Now, there are certain public health epidemics that we're seeing today.
Sure.
And even in the very recent future with things like AIDS. But it was this huge problem. So how to deal with it? The progressive movement basically which was really headed by women. It was headed by some of the first feminists, many of whom were very much Christian, who were pro-life. They were not in favor of abortion. They were promoting, basically, what they tried to do is promote, as a question of public health, sexual abstinence until marriage and sexual fidelity during marriage, and to promote basically equity between the sexes, that men should be held to the same sexual health standards as women. We shouldn't have this weird double standard where women have to be, pure, pristine virgins who are never touched by anyone, and men can just be sowing their wild oats and being, sexually lecherous. There shouldn't be this double standard. And they approached this as a public health question. This was really the precursor of sexual risk avoidance health education in public schools that was introduced in the 90s as a result of the welfare reform law. This idea that it's holistic, it's looking at relationships in general, relationship health, what actually leads for healthy families, stable families, healthy society. Now, the vast majority of people in the United States agreed with this progressive movement. It was embraced by churches. It was even embraced by the Catholic Church in a lot of ways. The founder of Notre Dame, Father Edward Sorin, was a big embracer of the temperance movement. At his 50th anniversary of priestly ordination, and this might be the only instance of this in the history of the Catholic Church, it was this huge celebration. You had all these bishops coming and all these priests from all over the place. A big mass at the Basilica of the Sacred Heart at Notre Dame. And they had a banquet afterwards. And guess what they served at the banquet? Water. End of list.
Wow.
Not even wine.
Wow.
At a Catholic function, if you can believe it.
Yeah, that wouldn't fly today.
And I think his notion was the Protestant community around us, we can't have lesser moral standards than the Protestant community around us. That was Father Sorin's reasoning in Notre Dame. Anyway, there was one person, though, who notably disagreed with the majority of the feminist movement, the majority of the country, the majority of the progressive movement of that time about sexual equity, about how to attain sexual equity. And her name was Margaret Sanger. Yes, that Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. Margaret Sanger also believed in equity between the sexes, but she believed instead of requiring men to live up to the same standard as women, she wanted to create conditions so that women could live down to the same standard as men. She wanted to promote sexual promiscuity both for men and for women. And how would she do that? By promoting contraception. That was how she promoted it. And she saw some of the poorer, particularly Irish and Italian and African American communities where people were poor, but they were having a lot of kids. And she thought, well, the solution to this is birth control. We need birth control. And we need to allow women to have the kind of sexual liberation that men have, and to be able to have sex with as many people as possible without consequences. And thus, she promoted birth control really heavily. Now, in her time, Margaret Sanger wasn't a big advocate, actually, for abortion. But
great irony. We
could see how this mindset of hers would immediately start leading to abortion, because the mindset was total sexual liberty, that everyone is this Rousseau-esque island unto themselves. We don't think of ourselves as part of a community or part of a family or part of a society. No. Everyone is a radical individual, and The only morality is helping yourself and serving yourself as long as you don't hurt someone else while you're doing it. And thus, Margaret Sanger was promoting birth control. And we see thus in the 20s. Boy, I'm saying thus a lot. This is bad radio. Yeah. Radio show hosts should not say thus. I'm going to put a no thus rule on this show. We see in the 20s this first divide.
A no thus order.
No thus order. We see in the 20s. Let me make this profound point. All right. In the 20s.
Like my Latin mass joke that I got to throw out there?
Yeah. Okay. In the 20s, we see this initial divide between what's called sexual risk avoidance, which is one stream currently of federal sex ed funding for sex ed programs, which focuses on a holistic view of health, societal health, familial health, relationship health, by looking at the social science and saying, waiting to have sex until you're married, being faithful during marriage, that leads to the best health outcomes, social welfare outcomes, versus sexual risk reduction, which is essentially all sex is fine, there's no sex that we're ever going to judge, just wear a condom. This divide in thinking was present even in the 20s, and Margaret Sanger was the chieftain of it. All right, we're going to talk about some stuff the Trump administration is trying to do to provide better health insurance options for pro-lifers in California who don't want to pay for abortion in their health insurance plans. We're going to get to that right after the break here on Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm just trying to make a living. I'm doing the best I can. What a great song this is. All right. Right to Life Radio here on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. I almost forgot which FM signal it was for Power Talk. Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We at Right to Life are sponsoring the 40 Days for Life campaign. We're outside of Planned Parenthood on Fulton Street. If you want to sign up for a spot, if you want to participate, just mosey on down. But if you want to sign up for a spot, we need people to sign up for spots so we know that we have volunteers out there throughout 40 Days for Life. Give us a call at 559-229-2229 to sign up for a spot. Like maybe, Allman Brothers wanted to come back in. You can sign up. Something I'd love to do, since this year's 40 Days for Life campaign, it lines up pretty much just with Lent. For all you Catholics out there who want to think of a good Lenten practice to do, maybe sign up for an hour every Friday on 40 Days, during 40 Days for Life. We actually need people on Fridays. Be out there for an hour to pray for the women going into the abortion clinic, for the people working at the abortion clinic, for the babies going into that abortion clinic. Pray that those babies come out of that abortion clinic. So give us a call, 559-229-2229, or get in touch with our director of the 40 Days for Life campaign, my employee, Tanya Gonzalez. Send her an email at Tanya, Tania, at rtlcc.org if you want to sign up. Okay. For the last segment, Jonathan brought to my attention a very interesting story that I want him to kind of lead off with. So first, a little background that I'll give, and then Jonathan will get into it. The situation with health insurance in California as it relates to abortion is really, really bad. Back in 2016? I
think that's when it was. Might have been even 2015.
In 2016, the California
Department of Managed
Healthcare. That's it. The California Department of Managed Healthcare, as Jonathan hits an E chord over there. He hit the spring on the microphone and made a big old noise. The California Department of Managed Healthcare issued a regulation saying that while existing California law specifies that every health insurance plan sold in the state has to cover so-called basic coverage, basic care, this regulation was introduced in 2016 that redefined what basic care meant. And it included elective surgical abortion as part of necessary care. Okay, elective abortion, necessary care. I don't think I need to elaborate on how stupid that is. So, as a result, every single health insurance plan sold in this state has to cover elective abortion. There's no exemption. If you're a church, if you're a nonprofit organization, there's no exemptions. If you're purchasing an insurance plan, it has to cover abortion. No exceptions. The whole state is like this. It is monstrous. We didn't even have our state legislature pass a law requiring it. It was simply done by executive fiat by a regulatory agency of the California government. Okay?
No new legislation passed.
No.
totally.
And furthermore, this regulation is probably, it's almost certainly, in violation of a certain point of federal law. This is called the Weldon Amendment. The Weldon Amendment basically says states are not allowed to discriminate against health insurance plans or health insurance providers or coverage on a basis of a failure to provide abortion coverage. California does more than discriminate against them. It banned literally every health insurance plan that doesn't cover abortion from being sold in this state.
Which is just
mind-blowing. It's so evil and horrible and stupid.
I mean, the example, this is a poor example, but it's one thing if you say, okay, look, we're going to require, because of greenhouse gas emissions, that every car company has to offer at least one car that is all electric, that is zero emissions. Now, if someone really wants to buy that, okay, they can go do that.
No, this is requiring every car in the state to be zero emissions.
Yes.
Like not giving you an option.
You can't buy one. There is literally no way to buy a car that doesn't have that. And likewise, I mean, mea culpa. Right now, my wife and I are not on traditional health insurance because there is no plan that we can buy that does not subsidize abortions. We are on one of those healthcare sharing ministries, which
suck. They're great for what they are,
but they are pretty. They're
limited.
not insurance.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, let's talk about the story from the story in the news in the 4.5 minutes we have here.
Yeah, this is when the San Jose Mercury News.
The Trump administration is basically going to force the state of California to let people know that their health insurance, especially if they're on Medi-Cal, is paying for abortion. So, Jonathan, why don't you explain that story?
Okay, so this is the title of this from the Mercury News is Trump's under the radar $1 abortion bill idea. Will it undermine Obamacare in California? So a really interesting, provocative title.
There you go.
It essentially says from March 4th, a little-noticed Trump administration proposal aims to force California's health insurers to send all their customers a second premium bill every month for $1, the amount the state requires to cover unrestricted abortion benefits. Unsurprisingly, California is pushing back. State officials fear that many Californians insured through Covered California will be confused receiving a second monthly bill, may even neglect to pay it, putting their coverage at risk. Now, John, why would it put their coverage at risk? Because the state is mandating that
everybody pay for this.
Yeah. Yes. And it's really amazing to me because it goes to show the Trump administration is not putting coverage at risk. The state of California is putting coverage at risk by requiring that this is a service.
Right.
If the state of California had not done this, if they had not mandated that every single plan cover abortion service, then what you would have is, if this went into effect, you would have the option that people would look and go, oh, I am a family of 4. I don't want to have coverage for abortion. I'm just not going to sign up for a plan that has abortion. Hey, I save $1 a month. No big deal on the savings, but at least I know I'm not being morally complicit with the murder of unborn children.
Right, exactly.
In this case, it's directly because of the state of California. And yet, surprise, surprise, the San Jose Mercury News is trying to say, well, this is the Trump administration trying to undermine Obamacare. No, they're trying to uphold one of the central supposed premises of Obamacare, which was, well, we're not going to use any of this money for this. And I want
for abortion. We're not going to use federal taxpayer dollars to pay for abortion, which is genuinely what's happening, even though federal monies. So the way the Obamacare health insurance exchanges work is basically they are offering subsidized health insurance plans at a low cost for people who qualify for it due to income levels and things like that. So your health insurance plan is artificially cheaper because federal dollars are paying for it.
Right.
Now, there is some federal restrictions on the money directly going to pay for abortion, but it's still federal dollars subsidizing a plan that covers abortion.
And the director of Covered California, Peter Lee, says, we believe these rules are unnecessary. Our plans are segregating funds. There's not one penny of federal dollars being spent on abortion-related services in California.
Which ignores, first of all, money is fungible. Yep. Like, it doesn't matter that you're keeping it segregated by having money go towards one thing. You are allowing money to go towards something else. Oh my goodness, Jonathan. Seems like a beautiful Italian song is wafting through the air.
That's right. Like spaghetti and meatballs.
Yes, indeed. This song is Bella Notte. Most famously, it was used during the most romantic scene in all of the history of movies. The scene in Lady and the Tramp, where Lady and the Tramp share a romantic candlelit dinner of spaghetti and meatballs. And right about at this point, they share a single spaghetti strand and wind up doing a big old smoocheroo on accident. Was it on accident, though? You tramp. He had it all planned out the whole time. My girls have watched this scene from this movie about 8 million times and have now been convinced that true love constitutes sharing a meatball with somebody.
Yeah.
Sharing some
Just like
foods.
mommy and daddy.
There you go. Well, folks, I think that's going to wrap it up for us at Right to Life of Central California for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next week. God bless. We hope you'll tune in again. Good day.
Happy Lent, everybody.
Happy Lent.